Okay.
Now, this is the 10th anniversary of ThrillerFest. This is the 10th year.
Yes.
How does it feel?
Well, we started, Gail and I co-founded the organization, International Thriller Writers, with a lot of help from a lot of people. We don't want to make it seem like we magically made it appear. A ton of people helped. But the first meeting was 10 years ago in Toronto at a convention of mystery writers and what have you called BoucherCon. And at that time, mystery more or less dominated the conventions, and there weren't a lot of places where thriller writers could get together. And we won't get into the whole distinction between thrillers and writers.
Yeah.
It's mystery. It's another topic. But 60 people showed up for our inaugural meeting, and Gail and I were voted presidents. I still remember it. We were on a stage, and there were the 60 people, and somebody came in whom I knew, and so I waved to him like this, and I turned around, and in the interim, I had been voted co-president. And oh dear, so Gail and I worked the phones for about 6 months, asking people of like minds. It had to be people who were giving. It had to be people who were creative, yes, but giving and willing to share. And the whole idea of the organization was that it would lift all boats, that while successful people would find perhaps a greater audience, by helping others, that beginning writers would also get lifted, and that we were all in this together. And so each year the organization got bigger and bigger, and here we are with the unbelievable 10th anniversary, and all the goodwill around us. I can't emphasize the goodwill enough, that it's a very generous group.
It seems like a lot of the experienced writers really help out the new writers and just share a lot of information.
That's the idea. On Tuesday of this week, I spent 10 and a half hours in a room with 10 apprentice writers. I'm not kidding you, 10 and a half hours. And they each had a manuscript, and I made comments about it, and basically, the whole group, and we talked, and it was, for some people, it was transformative, but I don't know a whole lot of people willing to spend 10 and a half hours, It was long.
And now you have a new book out now, right? Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, thank you. It's called Murder is a Fine Art, and it's a big stretch for me. It came out last year, and it was very well received, and so I emphasize the stretch because I created Rambo in a novel called First Blood, and most of my material has been contemporary American subjects. And 3-4 years ago, I became obsessed with a real-life literary personality of the 1800s whose name was Thomas de Quincey. And he was the first man to write about drug addiction in a very famous book called Confessions of an English Opium Eater. And he was drinking 16 ounces of opium a day and not dying. This is amazing. But the consequence of it was that he began to notice what the drug was doing to his brain, and I'm going to quote De Quincey a little. He talked about caverns and sunless abysses of our minds in which there were secret chambers that alien natures could hide undetected. Now that sounds like Freud.
Yeah.
And that's 50 years before Freud, and it turns out De Quincey invented the word subconscious, and basically there's evidence to show that Freud may have been inspired by De Quincey's ideas. And De Quincey was also an expert in murders. He was fascinated by them, and he wrote the first true crime essay about the first publicized murders in English history, the Ratcliffe Highway murders. And I got to thinking, this guy could be a detective. And, way ahead of Sherlock Holmes and everybody, because he sort of was a inspiration for Holmes, that what I could do is write a story in which he, because of his drug addiction and his interest in Freud, can solve crimes in the Victorian era that nobody else could. So that's the general idea. And plus, he was a wacko, wonderful guy and very funny. This is a literary convention, so I'll tell you a joke. He came up to an author and he said, "I enjoyed your book so much, I almost finished it." And so that's the kind of guy he was.
Oh, cool. It sounds really interesting.
Well, it's a hair-raising book, and I spent 3 years literally in which all I read were books about 1854 London. And I got to feel as if I was time traveling, and that I literally was on those fog-bound streets. And the goal became, could I make readers truly believe they were there the way I believed it? So, and the reviews, that was the exciting part. Entertainment Weekly, for example, said, you really believe you're there hearing the carts and the calls of the vendors and all that. And I was very, very pleased to have that, have somebody say you did your job.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Congratulations. I can't wait to read it.
It's got a lot of good press, so I'm very excited. I'm going to write a sequel to it.
Well, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much. We did this last year, and it's always fun.
Yeah.